acting president of Venezuela, teleSUR Rodriguez, sent a message to U.S. President Donald Trump, urging him to end the blockade and sanctions against the country as an act of goodwill in light of the improvement in bilateral relations. The declaration took place during the grand meeting with youth, where Rodriguez shared with more than 2,200 young people involved in different artistic and productive activities. The event aimed to highlight the importance of each sector in the progress of the country and to promote unity among Venezuelan youth. In this context, the acting president linked the diplomatic struggle with the spirit of Venezuelan youth, urging them to remain firm in the defense of national identity. Rodriguez asserted that the imperial blockade is not only an economic measure, but a direct attack on the future and the right to development of the region.
We started off on the wrong foot on January 3rd of this year. As you know, we were victims of a military attack by a nuclear power on this continent. And why did that happen? Because for so many years the transnational media companies spread lies about our country, because for so many years extremist sectors of Venezuelan politics spread lies about Venezuela and made demands that our country be attacked and blockaded. I hope, and it is the feeling of Venezuelans, that as friends of the United States and of all the countries of the world, the blockade and sanctions against Venezuela will cease, that our young people have the right to assert their aspirations, that our workers have the right to fair wages and income for themselves and their families, and that is the national feeling. President Trump, as a friend and partner, we are opening a new agenda of cooperation with the United States. End the sanctions and end the blockade against our country now, because that blockade is also against the youth of Venezuela, and the Venezuelan youth as a whole demands an end to the sanctions, an end to the blockade against Venezuela.
So the president of Venezuela, teleSUR Rodriguez, together with the youth of Venezuela, sent an applause of strength to the constitutional president, Nicolás Maduro, and the First Lady, Cilia Flores.
From here, you have my heart and my commitment. And from here I want us to send President Maduro and the First Lady, the fighter Cilia Flores, a strong applause. May he have much strength. May he feel the love of the Venezuelan youth. And that we are now in this process, dear young people. And let it be clear that yes, we are with him. But I also want the world to know what we are experiencing here in Venezuela, in an exceptional stage of our history.
Venezuela is set to commemorate the 37th anniversary of the social uprising of February 27, 1989, known as El Caracazo, a popular rebellion that was repressed by the state. During this event, the people expressed their opposition to the economic policies that the former president Carlos Andrés Pérez applied during his term in office between 1987 and 1993. The paquetazo, as these suffocating measures were known, generated protests due to public indignation at being unable to acquire even the basic necessities. These protests were violently repressed by the government through the army, which together with the police attacked the people with tanks and firearms, leaving a death toll of more than 3,000 and an unknown number of disappeared people. Since then, Venezuelans have commemorated this date with mobilizations in honor of the thousands of victims of the state's actions during the rebellion. In this context, Foreign Minister Ivan Gill, through his account on Telegram, stated the following: "Today we pay tribute to those who lost their life during the spontaneous social uprising that shook Venezuela on February 27, 1989. El Caracazo not only marked a breaking point for a political system that had turned its back on the people by orders from Washington, but it was also a popular expression calling for a profound transformation of the country, whose answers were found in the Bolivarian project of Commander Hugo Chavez. Honor and glory to the victims of El Caracazo, their sacrifice was not in vain. On Monday, the General Confederation of Labor in Argentina decided to take legal action to support the challenges to the labor reform, at least in part. In light of the bill's preliminary approval by the Chamber of Deputies and its expected final approval by the Senate on Friday, the union decided not to consult its board of directors on this matter. The organization, which has decided not to continue with the action plan in terms of strict confrontations and union disputes, has proposed a march for Monday that will be limited to union leaders and delegates and will not include a work stoppage. Now in Mexico, hundreds of tourists were stranded at the Puerto Vallarta International Airport due to the wave of violence taking place in the city. Images captured at the terminal showed passengers, mainly from the United States and Canada, crowded together in the open air as they watched columns of smoke rising in the vicinity of the premises. The immediate suspension of flights and deployment of ambulances created an atmosphere of anguish among families seeking to leave the city amid burning vehicles and blockades in hotel areas. The situation is escalating as airlines assess whether it is safe to resume flights under the threat of further violence in the region.
Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro sent a sworn statement to the Southern District of New York demanding his right to have his legal representation funded by the Venezuelan government. The document was sent in response to the Trump administration's decision to block the Venezuelan government from covering the legal expenses of the Bolivarian president. Washington moves to fall under the financial sanctions system enforced by the United States Department of the Treasury and the unilateral coercive measures against sanctioned countries and officials. Under the system, any transaction involving Venezuelan funds requires a specific authorization from that office. The measures violates the right to a fair trial under the Sixth Amendment of the United States Constitution. In his affidavit, President Nicolas Maduro declared on January 4, 2026, I hired Barry G. Pollack and his law firm Harrison, Laurent and Westlers LLP to represent me in this case. I understand that under the laws and practices of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, I have the right to have my legal defense paid for by the Venezuelan government. The Bolivarian leader also wrote, I understand that the government of Venezuela is willing to finance my legal defense, and I hope that this will be the case. I have relied on this expectation and cannot afford to pay for my own legal defense. If the court requires it, I will submit a financial affidavit to the court to demonstrate my ability to finance my own legal defense. The document concludes, based on my belief that the government of Venezuela will pay for Mr. Pollack and his law firm to represent me, Mr. Pollack appeared in my case on January 5, 2026, and since then I have been with him in my legal defense. He's my lawyer of choice, and I want Mr. Pollack to continue representing me as such. In Argentina, tension is unfolding in an outside Congress as senators prepare to give a final vote in President Javier Milei's controversial labor reform. Thousands of workers are holding protests against labor reform, an action that also included a 24-hour strike carried out by several unions. Among them, the State Workers Association, aided by its Spanish initials, Metal Workers Union UOM, and workers from the oil and the cotton production industry. The labor reform has already been approved as it reached a majority vote from both the Senate and the lower house, but deputies introduced some changes in last week's session that need to be green-lighted by the Senate in order for it to formally become a law. In this context, the center of Buenos Aires, Argentina, woke up to heavy security presence that turned into police violence against laid-off protesters who were trying to reach Congress prior to the final debate on the labor law. Hundreds of workers from different sectors set up roadblocks in the capital's downtown area and tried to make their voices heard against the lack of employment. Teachers, doctors, and former employees of different companies encountered a police cordon that, far from channeling discontent, opted for violent dispersal. The police operation left images of people running, rubber bullets being fired, and workers doused with pepper sprays in the vicinity of the iconic obelisk. The confrontation took place while the Congress Senate was getting ready to begin debating the controversial Milei-backed labor reform considered by many as brutal. Amid the largest United States military mobilization in the Middle East since the invasion of Iraq, Iranian journalists and geopolitical analyst Ilham Abedini warned in an interview with Brazil de Fato that if Washington chooses war, Israel will be a legitimate target and United States allies will pay the cost. More details with our correspondent Mauro Ramos.
In recent weeks, the United States has carried out a large-scale military mobilization in the Middle East, the largest concentration of U.S. forces in the regions since the invasion of Iraq in 2003. Amid this military pressure, Iran's foreign minister Sayed Abbas Araghchi left for Geneva on Wednesday. He is taking part in the third round of indirect nuclear talks with the United States, mediated by Oman. Iranian international relations analyst and journalist Ilham Abedini told teleSUR that even if an agreement is reached, she believes it will likely to be short-term. She says the ultimate goal for the United States remains military intervention in her country. Abedini is one of the journalists that survived the Israeli attack in June 2025 on the Tehran headquarters of IRIB, Iran's state broadcasting network.
Iran always try to use diplomacy tool and try to make dialogue, but actually every time we see how the United States try to get more and more from Iran. When we talk about nuclear issues, they're talking about missile program of Iran. When we talk about, if we talk about missile program, they would talk about the region, about its what they call proxies, but we do not consider it as a proxies, but they talk about these issues. I mean, they are not stopping. Every time they want more and more.
In his address to Congress this week, Trump said he prefers diplomacy with Iran. But Abedini exposes the double standard. While Washington talks negotiations, she says it actively promotes destabilization inside the country. In January, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi publicly accused the CIA and Mossad of involvement in actions across Iranian cities.
Israeli media reports are replete with allegations that Israel planned and conducted operations in Iran. Mr. Mike Pompeo, who was director of the CIA during the first Trump administration, said on Twitter, "Happy New Year to all Iranians in the streets, and also to all Mossad agents walking alongside them. It is evident that Mossad agents attempted to direct the terrorist acts."
Ilham Abedini says 2 years of genocide in Gaza carried out by Israel with unwavering U.S. support have exposed what was always behind the global North's human rights rhetoric.
Even Donald Trump, during these terrorist activities, he tweeted that the help is underway. Where is that help? If that help would be for Iranian people, that I'm not agreeing with that, but where was that help? Maybe these kind of aircraft and what is in the region are these are for Iranian people. This is for helping poor people.
Abedini acknowledges there may be management problems in Iran, but insists the country's economic hardship is a direct result of U.S. and allied sanctions.
Even in recent months, how much the medicine prices get higher. Although Iran has insurance and the government tried to actually manage the prices, but for some of patients, especially for cancer, hemophilia, that their medicine are we have to import their medicine. We face a real problem, and the cost would be so high, and many patients just pass away because of these sanctions. Some of these medicines, even we do not access to them. Even in higher prices, we do not access to them, and we cannot import that.
Abedini was inside the RIIB headquarters on June 16, 2025, when Israeli missiles struck the building. 3 people were killed, several wounded. She says the attack was no exception.
The most important issue, even more important that they strike against IRIB building, is that we knew that it could be it could be a target for Israeli regime because of experience, because of the history, because we saw that how Israeli regime actually targets journalists and the media centers during this war of and genocide against Gaza, and even before that in Syria, in Lebanon. And this is the most catastrophic thing, that everybody knew that anything can happen from Israeli regime, and nowhere is safe from Israeli regime.
Beijing, Mauro Ramos.
Cuba denounced the United States oil blockade on the island remains in full force this after Washington announced on the alleged raise of restrictions on the sanctions against countries who supply fuel to the Caribbean nation. Through his X accounts, Cuba's Deputy Foreign Minister Carlos Fernández de Cosío assured that the United States maintained its fuel boycott against Cuba in full force, with its fuel impact as collective punishment. Nothing announced in recent dates changed that reality, and added that the possibilities of conditional sales to the private sector already existed and did not alleviate the impact on the population. In this scenario, Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez addressed on Friday the remarks by United Nations official Volker Turk against the United States blockade on Cuba. Through his X accounts, Rodriguez shared the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, today denounced before the Human Rights Council the serious humanitarian impact of the aggressive escalation by the United States against Cuba, including the energy blockade. He emphasized that the measures affect the Cuban economy and the treatment of sick children and pregnant women, quoting Turk as he emphasized that nothing can justify the suffocation of a population. Cuba reaffirmed its commitment to combating all acts of terrorism following the attempted infiltration of a speedboat carrying 10 armed terrorists from the United States. On Thursday, Cuba Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs Carlos Fernández de Cosío announced that the government had launched an investigation to clarify the circumstances of the thwart attempt to infiltrate the country for terrorist purposes. Fernández de Cosío also provided details about the arsenal of weapons seized on the speedboat. In addition, the Cuban Deputy Foreign Minister reported on channels of communication with Washington to address the incident.
From the outset, having detected that the naval vehicle originated from the United States, the Cuban authorities have been in communication with their U.S. counterparts. Including the Department of State and the Coast Guard regarding this terrorist attempt. An investigation is underway to clarify the facts with the utmost rigor. The Cuban government is willing to exchange information with the United States on this matter. Among other requirements, we will request information about those involved, the means used and other details from the U.S. authorities, through the mechanisms in force between the two countries. U.S. government authorities have expressed their willingness to cooperate in clarifying these unfortunate events.
In other news, the acting president of Venezuela, teleSUR Rodriguez, sent a message to U.S. President Donald Trump, urging him to end the blockade and sanctions against the country as an act of goodwill in light of the improvement in bilateral relations. The declaration took place during the grand meeting with youth, where Rodriguez shared with more than 2,200 young people involved in different artistic